Hello, everyone. Good day. My name is Mark Fatum, and Katrina was nice enough to ask me to come speak to you today for a little bit about record-keeping issues and how they relate to the care and treatment that child life specialists will provide to their patients in the clinical setting. So I understand that you are in the Masters in Child Life program, and again, I'm here to talk to you about record-keeping. I am a lawyer with Rhodes McKee in downtown Grand Rapids, and I have devoted most of my career to the representation of healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, technicians, in professional liability or medical malpractice cases. And in that regard, I've had a lot of experience with medical records and the implications of record keeping in the context of medical liability or medical malpractice actions. Good news is I've never seen a child life specialist as part of one of these cases, so I think the chances of you ever being directly involved in one of these cases would be minimal. But I think there are some important comments that I can make about medical record keeping and how indirectly you could assist us or assist the healthcare providers that may be involved in such a case, and also assist you with general concepts of record keeping and give you some perspective about the importance in record keeping within your specialty area as a child life specialist. So with that, I do have a PowerPoint presentation here. I know you cannot see me, maybe a good thing, but we will run through the PowerPoint presentation, and then I know that Katrina will be accepting questions from any of you after the presentation is completed. You can forward those to me, and I'd be happy to supplement this presentation as need be in order to answer any questions and help you understand this process. So let's run through our PowerPoint presentation here, and I can give you a general overview and then some details. And I'm trying to click this forward here, and I don't see that it's moving. One moment. Okay, here we go. So what I'm trying to do here and our objectives that we want to try to meet here with this presentation and with medical records is, as you can see here on the PowerPoint, to identify the importance of record keeping and record documentation in patient care, to understand the basics of record documentation and the legal application of documentation in the clinical setting. And I know that as a child life specialist, you may be in various venues in providing care to children and families, maybe in a hospital. I understand you could potentially be in a school system or other healthcare settings. And I think this may apply equally to all of those different settings, but I will offer some special emphasis with regard to inpatient hospital setting record keeping. So first of all, the law in Michigan. What are the obligations for a healthcare specialist with a master's in child life to document patient interaction? So I had some smart people in my office do some research on that, and they looked at a couple of the statutes or the laws in Michigan. Our Michigan legislature has passed some specific laws regarding mandatory record keeping for healthcare providers. And the question is whether or not that would apply to a child life specialist. I think the short answer is yes, it definitely would. So up on the PowerPoint you see MCL, which is just stands for Michigan Compiled Laws, and that's the specific citation. And what it says there, and you can read along with me, is that it requires an individual licensed under this article, quote, to keep and maintain a record for each patient for whom he or she has provided medical services, essentially under the Public Health Code. And then there are two sections there. In the second section, the 333.18501 subsections 4 and 5 talk about social work. The practice of social work at the bachelor's level and master's level does not include the practice of medicine. However, close inspection of the statute suggests that the practice of social work would include the provision of medical services, even if the practice of social work does not include the practice of medicine. And I know a child life specialist doesn't necessarily equate with a social worker, but I think the level of services from a master's program standpoint and certification would be analogous. And so the conclusion that we have, and I think this is important, is that a child life specialist should maintain a record for patients for whom they provide services. So practically speaking, you will want to perform record documentation in your work, and it does seem to be required here, and I would say mandatory under the state of Michigan laws. And of course, that just makes good sense in patient care practice. So then we look at the mental health code. Again, this is a Michigan compiled laws 330.1746, and it talks about a complete record being kept for each recipient of mental health services. And that record should include information pertinent to the services provided to the recipient, the patient, and pertinent to the legal status of the recipient. So essentially what they're saying is you need to keep a record, and what I would emphasize here is what you want to do when you keep a record, and we'll get into this in a moment, is to, what I say, quote, tell the story, close quote. You want to tell the story of your care. And that doesn't mean a lengthy narrative, but what we're talking about is a concise, accurate reporting of your interaction and care provided to the patient for a number of good reasons, which we'll get into. There's also some mention in this section of the code, of the law, about confidentiality. And that would relate, I think, to the HIPAA law. You've probably heard about the HIPAA law in your work and in your studies. And that's a different discussion for a different time. But HIPAA, as you probably know, is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and really talks about the privacy of patient care and patient record keeping. So I'll just reference that the record keeping that would be mandatory for you would also be confidential in nature. So we continue with the next PowerPoint slide on the Michigan Mental Health Code. And essentially the conclusion is that you are to keep and maintain a medical record pertinent to the services provided to the patient. So now let's discuss a few additional things about record keeping. I've prepared a roadmap here that can guide us in the next few minutes in our discussion. We want to talk about the principles of documentation. We want to discuss the electronic medical record, which has been fodder for a great deal of litigation and creates issues in our cases where we're dealing with these court claims. Liability considerations in light of the electronic medical record and electronic discovery, documenting such things as informed consent, adverse practices, and also we'll point out some practice pointers and best practices for you in your work as a child life specialist. So let's just review a little bit of history here. In the beginning, and I was practicing when these were commonplace, and these were the records, were what we called SOAP notes, S-O-A-P notes. We have an example of that up here on the PowerPoint slide. It is essentially a handwritten note, and it would follow this SOAP format, which stands for, the S is for subjective, O is for objective, A is for assessment, and P is for plan. So the provider would write out, subjective would be the patient's history or complaints, objective would be the physical examination and the results of that, assessment would be a provisional diagnosis or a differential diagnosis or diagnosis, and then the plan would be obviously what the plan would be for the patient, and that's how things went for many years. But as you're probably well aware, with the onset of the electronic medical record, things started changing pretty quickly. The paper charting was commonplace in the 60s and 70s and even into the 1980s. And then in the 1990s, there started to be a change with the way medical records were maintained and stored. And the Institute of Medicine issued an article. They started looking at these electronic medical records and quality of patient care. And they came out with a big study back in 1999, over 20 years ago, called To Err is Human. This was a report issued by the Institutes of Medicine, and it related to an increased awareness of medical errors and resulted in a big push for patient safety. This article, and I've not looked at it in detail to verify it, but again, it came out from the Institutes of Medicine, was talking about as many as 44,000 to 98,000 patients dying each year because of medical errors, some of them related to medical record keeping. And so the push in the late 1990s was for better record keeping, better record documentation, and an emphasis on the importance of good documentation of the record in the care of patients. So then we talk about the adoption of the electronic medical record system. And I don't know how many of you have been paying attention to this over the years, but the law has changed and there started to be put into place mandatory requirements regarding electronic medical records. And I know the push has been to integrate the electronic systems so that a physician's office could speak, so to speak, to the hospital and vice versa. And this became fairly widespread over the last 15 to 20 years. And you can see from the screen here, in 2001, 18%, give or take, of office-based physicians had an electronic medical record system. By 2013, about 7 years ago, that was up to 78%, and we are up over 81% here in Michigan, and it's probably higher now today. So, question, why did it take so long to implement? Of course, change is hard. Many physicians and other providers thought the paper-based chart was more efficient, more cost-effective, and multiple studies showed that paper records, well, you can read that. They talked about the cost, loss of productivity, susceptibility to loss or damage, illegible or incomplete records. These are some of the reasons why we were pushed to the electronic medical record. But I do believe the push was more national, as I have talked about for a few minutes here. Then there was passage of this High-Tech Act in 2009 as part of that stimulus package that went into effect after the recession, or during the recession, 2007, 2008, addressing the privacy and security concerns associated with health information. And it gave money for help in instituting electronic medical record and some penalties for not moving forward in that regard. So again, talking about the electronic medical record, there was hope that the electronic medical record would help bring down costs in providing health care, would provide quick and easy, ready access to healthcare providers and patients and their records and healthcare information, would potentially help to reduce medical errors, and very importantly, and I think this is important for all of you as child life specialists, facilitating coordinated care. I think that's something that you should remember and should be emphasized in this discussion we're having today about the medical record-keeping function of a child life specialist, facilitating coordinated care, and how important that is in the inpatient setting and even the outpatient setting. We want to tell our story, tell the story in the medical record so that we get an accurate, concise accounting of what specifically occurred, and so that there is good coordination and continuity of care, so that other providers can look at your record, you can look at other providers' records, and everybody can be brought up to speed on a patient or the patient's family's current situation, and also to improve patient participation in healthcare. So then the question is, well, was any thought given to the risks associated with the electronic medical record or problems that might arise with the electronic medical record? And we talk about the EPIC system. I'm familiar with this system. I don't know if any of you have worked in institutions where the electronic medical record is an EPIC-based system. There are several different systems. Spectrum Health, for example, moved to the EPIC system in the last couple of years. Before that, they were on what was called the Cerner system. And so there are different little quirks and traits to each system. And I would just encourage you, when you get into a specific institution, hospital, other institution, that you become familiar with their electronic medical record system as best you can in order to facilitate your ability to make records, document things, and enhance the care that you provide to the patients in your practice. So we have the convergence of the electronic medical record with e-discovery. When I say e-discovery, what we're really talking about are lawsuits. Hopefully any of you will ever have to deal with. But the federal courts and the state courts here in Michigan started to recognize that with an electronic medical record, there would be requests to look at the electronic medical record. Very different from the paper chart. But now the lawyers were going to want to be looking at the electronic chart and, importantly, the backup information that is behind the actual electronic medical record itself. Things like the audit trail, keystroke inputs on the record, which I'll talk about in a minute, all of which is electronically stored and available. And so the court started recognizing this and started putting rules in place to allow the attorneys, litigants, people who have sued or been sued, to get access to these electronic medical records and the backup information, the audit trails, the keystrokes. So what's the big deal about that? Well, there's quite a bit more information that exists today than the old SOAP, S-O-A-P notes that I mentioned a moment ago. There's a great deal of information regarding vital signs, labs, interoffice communications. The computer saves virtually everything. There is significantly more data now available for each patient. It used to be that we would get a medical record for a patient who maybe had a 4 or 5 day hospital stay for a surgery, and the record might be a ½ an inch thick. And now if we ask for a printout of an electronic medical record for a hospital stay of 3 or 4 or 5 days, we get multiples more of pages of those documents. And again, the metadata, audit trail, keystrokes, a lot more information. So what's the big deal about this? What do we do with that? Well, we have to deal with it. And I think for your purposes as child life specialists, I think today the biggest thing is to be aware, just to be aware. Know the system, the electronic medical record system that you're working with. Understand how documentation occurs. Understand what your obligations are in the institution to document records. And know how that record is going to store your information. It will store things such as the time that you opened up the chart, the time that you closed the chart, the time that you actually documented. If you make changes to the record, you need to know how that's done and how that would appear to a subsequent viewer of the chart. If there is free text capability in that chart. And again, I'm not sure which institutions you'll ultimately be working in. Some institutions' electronic record is a little bit better in allowing free text than others. Some electronic medical records have drop-down menus where you're making menu choices about care. I think with a child life specialist and your interaction with a child and the family, you're probably going to be doing a lot of free text inputs, meaning you can just put your own narrative in there without being restricted to what the hospital is allowing you for drop-down menus. Again, that's specific to an institution. I know there are some healthcare institutions that I work with that still allow handwritten notes or still have handwritten notes in the record, particularly from social workers, child life specialists, and you may have that opportunity as well. But I think the significant point is to be aware of the system that you're working in and be aware of your ability to document things and how the electronic medical record stores that information and what others see when they access that information. So what is the medical record now? I think I've covered this a little bit. It used to be just that paper chart that I talked about. It would just be copied, or message slips, or voicemail notes or prescriptions. Now the electronic medical record is virtually everything that I just mentioned. The documentation, the keystrokes made by the healthcare provider documenting the patient's vital signs, exam results, etc., but also would include the audit trail. And of course, the audit trail is a documentation of every healthcare provider who was in the record, when they were in the record, when they removed themselves from the record, and exactly what they were looking at. All of that is part of this, and anybody who is documenting in the chart should know that. As I said, this includes the metadata and whether or not the records were changed or amended in any fashion. So again, something that you just need to be aware of. So where is discovery in court actions? Where's discovery of the medical chart leading? You can look at the PowerPoint here. The lawyers who are involved in these cases are asking for the entire electronic medical record. They're looking for backup documentation that sometimes shows up in the electronic record on the computer screen, but may not show up initially when the record itself is requested. Pop-up alerts, warnings, reminders, guidelines that may appear on the chart, text messages, intra-hospital communications, the audit trail, as I talked about, footprints that are created by the healthcare providers making entries in the chart. And again, I'm giving this to you a little bit from the context of what we're dealing with in the professional liability medical malpractice arena. But I think this is just important to know in providing care to patients. Again, I think it's important for you as child life specialists when you're caring for a patient and the family and providing assistance to them to make a record of that, to make sure that it is concurrent with the care provided, timely, to make sure that it's accurate, and tells your story about your interaction with the patient, the assessment, and the plan, and any interaction you have with other providers. I've seen many, many times in the record where such entries can be useful in all aspects of patient care, and not just in the lawsuit sense, but when you have a patient who's in the inpatient setting or otherwise, and he is receiving services from a child life specialist, if that record is timely and accurate and to the point and complete in talking about the interaction with the family, that can assist all of the healthcare providers involved in the patient's care with that continuity of care and providing that patient a good, continuous, coherent plan for his or her health. So I think all of that is important. So maybe you're confused by all of this. What is this electronic medical record, and what am I supposed to do, and how does this affect me when I go about charting? So how does this affect how I chart? So how you chart really is not a reflection of whether you're providing good care or not. We know that after you finish this program, you're all going to be exceptional child life specialists with extraordinary abilities to take care of patients and help the families. And certainly in my arena, in helping hospitals and doctors and nurses and other providers, we know that keeping records is really not what we call a standard of care function. In other words, it doesn't dictate whether good care was provided or not, but a good electronic medical record and good record keeping certainly helps to tell the story and helps to allow all the providers to explain what happened with the patient more completely and in better detail if there is good record keeping. So how does that affect how I chart? Well, again, the principles of record keeping have remained the same over the years, and the importance of record keeping has stayed the same. The way record keeping has changed with the advent of the electronic medical record, but again, the purpose, I think, still remains the same. And as I've said to you here just in the last few moments, effective notes that you would make and other providers involved in that patient's care would make should be timely, thorough, tailored to the patient and the issue at hand, and again, my favorite, tell the story. So if you're asked 2 or 3 years later to go back and tell us about your interaction on a specific day with a patient, you can go back and look at your record, and you can tell the story. It will refresh your memory, refresh your recollection about that patient, and allow you to explain your interaction with the patient on that day. This can assist greatly with patient care in the moment, and also the continuity of care as time goes by and others can read your note. It helps with consistency in interaction, consistency in plan for the patient, and consistency in follow-through with the patient. And when I say the note needs to tell a story, I think I'd be the first to tell you how much I respect how busy healthcare providers are in the moment and during a day or week involved and dedicated in providing health care. And this discussion is not meant to indicate that you're supposed to spend 40 hours a week writing, documenting, entering into the electronic medical record each and every detail of your involvement with the patient. It can be very concise, and it can be very much to the point, but you really need to be able to tell your story, and to the extent you can create note-keeping, to do that in a concise way will be very helpful for the reasons I mentioned. Patient continuity of care, good plan, good follow-through. So we talk about pitfalls with the electronic medical record. Now, I don't know how your individual institutions are going to be set up with their electronic medical record when you get out in the workplace full-time as a child life specialist. And as I said before, you should be aware of the electronic medical record that you're working with and potential downfalls, and also the positives of the record. But some downfalls here up on the PowerPoint presentation, and these have been documented by studies of physicians over the years, and nurses and other providers. Providers can, not intentionally, but they can get tired, they can get fatigued, they can not use the system to its fullest. They start maybe taking shortcuts with drop-down menu. There's an issue with auto-population. So if you put something in the record on day one of a patient's 20-day stay, oftentimes, frankly, that will get pulled through and continue to show up on subsequent notes. So there should be clarity on auto-population. If things change, they should be documented. But in any event, pitfalls can relate to that, the auto-population and inaccurate carryover of that information, fatigue on the part of the provider, cut and paste and use of templates. That's just providers having a pre-programmed, pre-stated summary for a specific type of care that's being rendered, and they hit a button and the template, the pre-printed template goes into the electronic medical record, and it's not a specific reflection of that patient's care by that provider, but it's just a boilerplate that goes in there. Those need to be reviewed to make sure they're patient-specific. Errors in entry of the documents in the electronic medical record, and late charting. And you should know how your system deals with that. If there are charting errors that need to be amended, or there's late charting, most of the electronic medical records require that shows up on the record itself. There's either a line crossing out a document, or an entry, you put the new entry in, and then there's initialing, and there's a time where the new entry is put in. It's all fairly detailed, so any amendment or late entry should show up on the chart, and you should be aware of that and how it appears on the chart. And then we have discussion about the drop-down menu, auto-population, and carryover. I would tell you at this point, I'll let you read this about the drop-down choices. They may not be complete, they may not accurately reflect the care, auto-population, earlier vitals, earlier entries by providers that appear in later notes but aren't consistent with what's actually going on. Those can all lead to an inaccurate view of the patient's current condition. So I would say to you, another note that you want to leave here with, and definitely remember, is to embrace free text. If you have the ability to handwrite a narrative, or if you're limited to the electronic medical record but are allowed to type freely and free text in there, feel free to use that liberally to the extent that it can help you tell your story and timely, concisely, and accurately document your interaction with a patient. Know your institution system and what you can do with that. Again, we've talked about some of these that I'm putting up on the PowerPoint now. Alert fatigue. People get used to the way a system works, repetitive use, and need to be aware. Every patient is different, unique. Every situation, every interaction you have is different or unique, and we don't want alert fatigue or repetition to take over. There needs to be a critical analysis and documentation for each of the patient interactions. Again, this is not meant to say that you should be spending significant time documenting the record and abandoning the importance of patient interaction and patient care. I'm really just emphasizing the need to be accurate in record keeping for the reasons I stated before, to help tell the story, to help with the continuity of care, to help with follow-up of the patient. All of these are very important reasons. In my arena, in the medical liability arena, working with hospitals, doctors, nurses, other providers, certified licensed providers, this is all very important in allowing us to look back and to be able to understand what happened through the course of that patient's care. So again, I think we've talked about this cut and paste and templates. Again, know your electronic medical record system and know how best to use it so that you can make timely, accurate, and complete records and tell that story about your involvement with the patient and patient care. I don't know if in the hospital or institution where you'll work, if there will be a single child life specialist that is working with a patient or the family, or whether because of shifts and length of stay, the patient may be seen by several child life specialists, may also be seen by other areas, specialties such as social work, nurses, therapists, and others. And so another important reason to document is so that if you're not there on a given day, and one of your colleagues or partners is there seeing the patient, or other specialists or subspecialists are seeing the patient, that your record is available for them to understand how things are working, how things are going with that patient over time. And you know, if there's an incorrect or just a bad entry with the data entry errors and pull-throughs, a bad entry can persistently get pulled through in the electronic medical record and continue to be a problem in the record. So we want to be accurate from the outset when the record is being made. And I've seen that in a number of situations, and again, in the professional liability arena, where there's bad input, inaccurate input, and it continues throughout the electronic medical record. And then later, when we try to explain what happened, it becomes difficult. So the electronic medical record isn't necessarily our friend in those situations, but we have to work with it. So accuracy and input, also very important. We talk about logins. Again, if you're working on the electronic medical record, you should have a specific signature, a login code. Those should not be shared so that you can be reassured that your entries into the record are truly your entries and not someone else's. Also, the HIPAA regulations that I mentioned earlier in this discussion, we don't want to let other people take your password, log in under your name, and you don't want other people to have access to a patient's chart if they're not directly involved in the patient's health care or don't have a valid HIPAA release to gain access. So I think essentially you just want to protect your own entries and protect the accuracy and confidentiality of your entries. I've not really seen this as an issue. I know we all read in the newspaper or see on the computer, on the internet from time to time, issues about unauthorized people getting into patient charts. So something to be aware of. Next, PowerPoint slide earlier, late charting. I think we've talked about this. Every entry that you make in the electronic record is time-stamped, date-stamped, and your initials, your identifier is in there. If an entry is late, sometimes in a litigation setting, the attorneys will try to claim this was a cover yourself or a CYA entry. So again, timely entries are important, accurate entries are important, again, just to protect the integrity of the record. So as I said before, I've not seen a case in 35 years of doing this where a child life specialist or a provider, certified provider in your area has been subject to a case, but we have tips for the healthcare providers that I think would apply to you to reduce legal risks related to the electronic medical record. And I will say at this time that I have seen notes from counselors, child life specialists, social workers, others who were not named as parties in a professional liability claim, but who made notes that were extremely important and helpful in evaluating a case and understanding family dynamics, understanding patient issues, understanding the social, psychological, medical part of a patient's stay, family interaction, all of these types of things that are important to a child life specialist and key in your involvement in care and treatment and counseling of patients in the record that can help us in a more general sense evaluate and defend healthcare providers in a professional liability or medical malpractice lawsuit. Child life specialists and others will have notes in there about family dynamics, who was present, who was not present, who was there to see how the patient was doing, sometimes more importantly, who was not there. So documentation of these types of things that you would do as part of your work and professional services to a patient and family that become part of the record can be important for us. So again, the accuracy, the timeliness, conciseness, telling the story all become very important, not only in continuity of care for the patient and providing excellent care and services to the patient, but to others who encounter the patient and to those of us like me who look at a chart 2 or 3 years later and are trying to look back and piece things together and better understand what occurred in the moment. So adverse event or outcome, I don't know that any of you would be involved in this. I know there would be instances where you may be involved in taking care of kids with traumatic injuries or significant medical situations, illnesses, significant illnesses in the hospital, loss of a loved one, other healthcare situations. And when I say adverse outcome, as you see it here on the PowerPoint, we're talking about a patient having a complication, a patient making a claim that a significant medical issue was not dealt with correctly, or an adverse outcome that occurred in the hospital setting. And so, and I don't know if this would directly apply to you, but to protect oneself from an adverse event or outcome, as the PowerPoint slide says, good defense for any adverse outcome starts with good informed consent and documentation of a treatment plan. I don't know if that would directly apply to you, but documentation of a treatment plan and patient understanding and agreement with the treatment plan, I think, is an important part of a good note. If an adverse event arises, I think any documentation that you would ever be required to do should be very factual. It should be timely and should, again, just recount the specific facts of the case without offering specific opinions or drawing in other care providers. And then discussion with the family in the situation of an adverse event is important, and that's where risk management gets involved, and there should be immediate discussion with them, and then they will direct you on how to follow up with the family. So next slide, Charting Adverse Events 101. I think this just documents what I stated. You want to document details of discussions with the patient's family, if an adverse event arose, and be factual and not edited. Be comfortable that you're going to make an accurate note from the outset. Timeliness of charting is important. I would argue patient care is more important. Timeliness of patient care, patient interaction, patient services is of the utmost importance, but charting is also important. So we don't want you to have your nose in the electronic medical record while you're interacting with family, providing services, but after you're done with the interaction and it's fresh in your mind, to the extent you can contemporaneously chart, that would be an excellent way to do things. Again, we're not talking about narrating a book or writing a lengthy note, but accurate, concise, contemporaneous chart at the time. That will make things easier, cleaner, more straightforward in this wonderful world of chart documentation. Cut and paste, I'm not a fan of cut and paste. If you can make new notes, and I don't know if this would apply to you, but you want to make a new note, a unique note to the specific encounters with the patient that you're being required to document. And as I said, accurate, concise, tell the story. You can quote the family if it's appropriate. You can attribute statements or desires to the family. I've often found that helpful in retrospect. If you're offering certain services or options to a patient or the patient's family, and there's a vigorous debate, somebody disputes that they want to follow through on a plan, documentation of that can sometimes be, well, frankly, oftentimes be very helpful after the fact. Just as a clear note of the discussion and the plan with the patient, very helpful. Familiarize yourself with the printed record. I think I said this before. Know how the electronic medical record system works. Know how your record looks to others if it's pulled up on the system. Know how it's saved. Know how the audit trail works. In other words, be aware that every time you're in the chart, there's going to be a permanent documentation of that in the electronic medical record. And be familiar with how the timing of care, charting are captured in the electronic medical record at your institution. Next, safeguard passwords and logout. I think we've talked about that. Don't give out your passwords. Make sure you log out. You want to protect the integrity of your notes. Double check your note. If you're handwriting it, it'd be an easier task. If you're putting it in the electronic medical record through drop-down boxes or carryovers, take a look at it before you finally enter it into the record to make sure that it's accurate. If you notice an error, you want to correct it. You can use free text. Again, know your institution and make sure that the institution is documenting it as an amendment or a correction. If a carryover condition is resolved, note it on the chart. Make note of that. If you are part of the system where you're getting pop-up alerts, pop-up warnings, pop-up direction, you may want to put a note in the chart reflecting that you saw that and you dealt with it and responded to it, if that would come up in your professional practice. Again, accuracy, completeness, recognition of how the record works. All important things in record documentation. Late entries, same issue as we talked about before. If you're going to make a late entry, make sure that it's documented as such. I think the electronic medical record captures that and it's noted as late entry. Maybe a brief explanation as to why it was a late entry. And again, keep it very factual. And instead of offering opinions about what went right, wrong, or otherwise, just factually enter into the record. So if I say tell the story in your note, is my favorite saying. I would say free text is your friend is probably my second favorite. Don't give up or abandon your ability or your right to write in the chart or free text in the chart. And again, as a child life specialist, you may still be able to handwrite narratives in the chart. But don't abandon that if you're looking at drop-down menus and pre-populated entries. Free text is your friend. Narrative notes, to the extent that you can use them, and if they're accurate, concise, on point, those will be your friend. And again, they'll help with the quality of patient care and the continuity of patient care. So as we recap this, and we look back at the electronic medical record, again, everything in the electronic medical record is discoverable. Lawyers and others are getting savvier by the day and understanding that they can get audit trails, keystroke inputs, and really get behind the medical record itself and find out how it was created. We want to work to safeguard an authentic record. You want to double check your work. You want to familiarize yourself with how the records work so that another provider who gets into the system and is looking at your record, you know how they're looking at it. Free text is your friend. And again, tell your story. Good record keeping is essential in providing good quality health care to patients and patients' families, and its importance cannot ever be overstated. It is key. Know how your institution's electronic medical record works. Understand whether or not free text or handwritten notes are allowable or encouraged. In any manner that you make a note, make sure that it's accurate, timely, and complete. It tells the story. I emphasize it doesn't have to be long, but it should accurately reflect the professional services you've provided, interaction with the family. You want to be able to go back to your record in a year or 2 years or 3 years, look at your note, and be able to recount what happened at that patient interaction or that visit, or reconstruct what occurred when you review your note. Again, length is not the key, but accuracy is the key. You want to capture the essence of the professional services provided and any discussions with the patient or the family or the events that occur. All of this will help promote good care, good communication, good interaction with the patient and the family, and excellent health care being provided. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today. Very much appreciated. I wish I were there to see you in person. I like the question and answer interaction because I can better gauge if there were things that I said that didn't quite stick or weren't clear. But I understand from Katrina that questions will be accepted. You can pass those through, and I would be happy to respond to them either in an email format or with a follow-up presentation. And I very much appreciate you allowing me to participate in your work. I wish you all the best in this master's program in your work to become a child life specialist. I applaud you for dedicating your work, your professional life, to helping with the care of others and helping to provide excellent care in our community. So thank you for that, and again, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today.